What is it to be human is one of the most fundamental questions that we can ask. The way in which we answer this question has a huge impact not only on how we view ourselves, but on how we view others and on what our responsibilities are towards them. What do we owe one another as human beings? In fact, the answer to the question, what is it to be human, informs our answer to a whole host of questions. For example, do we have a responsibility to refugees? How should we structure our economy? How do we interact with the natural world? Consequently, this question is foundational for Catholic social teaching, an understanding developed over centuries of how society may best be organised to defend and promote the good of all. In brief terms, the answer to the question which the Catholic tradition arrived at was as follows. Firstly, human nature is real. It is something of which we can have an objective understanding. Secondly, humans are social beings. Thirdly, love is the foundation of all human communities. Fourthly, and particularly important for what we will explore in this video, all humans are made in the image of God and have an inviolable and inherent dignity. This vision about what it is to be human informs the entire Catholic tradition, both how people have thought about issues of social justice and how they have tried to bring about justice. Included within this are the many distinct strands associated with different religious movements, like the Benedictine monks or the many congregations of religious women founded to teach or nurse the sick in the 19th century. This series of reflections will focus on one such movement, the Order of the Preachers, commonly known as the Dominicans. The Dominicans were founded by St. Dominic in 1216, and from the beginning were comprised of both brothers, known as friars, and sisters, known as nuns. The friars were characterised by their pioneering approach to religious life. Instead of staying within the walls of the monastery, as had traditionally been the case for religious orders, they went out preaching, evangelising and participating in civic life. They actively worked with lay people, including the poor and the oppressed. They brought an expertise to this mission, which came from years of long, hard study. This made the Dominicans well placed to respond to the questions of social justice that arise as part of everyday life. In fact, there is a long history of Dominican interventions when it comes to the question of what is it to be human. Father Anyedi Akuri explains.
There is a big tradition going back centuries of Dominicans engaging in social justice issues because, as you mentioned earlier, the fundamental rights of a human being created in the image of God, wherever and however it is violated, we as other human beings must come to the rescue. It doesn't matter nationality, color, age, education level. The fundamental point is that you and me are created in the image of God, in the likeness of God, and so that dignity is conferred on me and you by virtue of creation, not by anything else. And so no one has the right to violate that. No one has the right to demean you, to denigrate you, because you are a child of God.
Perhaps the most famous historical example of Dominican action of the kind that Father Anyedi describes occurred in the 16th century. A group of Dominicans from Salamanca in Spain were sent as missionaries to the island of Hispaniola, in what is now the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. In Hispaniola, the indigenous people were subjected to brutal colonial rule by the Spanish, who enforced what was called an encomienda system. In the encomienda, the non-Christian indigenous people were enslaved by the conquerors and forced to work under them, in some instances being subjected to physical punishment or death if they refused. In 1511, the Dominicans denounced this practice in a forthright sermon, which they jointly composed but which was read by only one of them, Antonio de Montesinos, the first European to criticise the encomienda. Montesinos condemned the colonisers, proclaiming that they were all in mortal sin. Crucially, he posed the following key questions to them, saying, "By what right, with what justice do you hold these Indians in such cruel and horrible slavery? Are they not human beings? Do they not have rational souls? Are you not obliged to love them as yourselves? These questions ushered in a way of thinking which was totally contrary to the order of the day. Montesinos emphasised the inherent dignity and humanity of the indigenous people, irrespective of their place of birth and their religious beliefs. The sermon caused an uproar but did not substantially change the colonialist approach. However, it did pave the way for another Dominican, Bartolomé de las Casas. Las Casas would become one of the most passionate advocates for the rights of the indigenous people. But he did not always see things this way. He began his working life in Hispaniola as a landowning priest who put indigenous people to work under the encomienda system, whilst also teaching them the catechism. It was not until he was 30, in 1514, that he underwent a profound conversion to recognise the injustice of the situation. He acted immediately, freeing his forced labourers and relinquishing his encomienda. The rest of his life would be committed to two central aims. Firstly, he would argue for the recognition of humanity and the inherent dignity of the indigenous people. And secondly, he would attempt to formulate new, free and equitable communities under which the indigenous people could work without exploitation and where their rights and culture would be respected. The status quo was so powerful, however, that the latter aim proved very difficult to realise. Despite Las Casas' effort to organise new forms of equitable community, including under his own direction, the colonialist society was hostile to reform. Nonetheless, Las Casas' trailblazing effort in arguing that the rights of the indigenous people should be recognised in law were not in vain. Because of Las Casas, King Charles I of Spain introduced a Declaration of Rights and Freedoms for indigenous people in 1542. Nothing like it had been produced in the Dutch, French or British colonies, nor would it be later. Indeed, Las Casas' action led King Charles to halt military expansion, whilst the first moral debate in European history over the rights and treatments of the indigenous people took place, with Las Casas making the case for the abolition of the encomienda. Beginning from a position where the ethics of colonisation and the status of the indigenous people were not even questions for discussion, Las Casas' relentless campaigning brought them to the forefront of society. Not only this, but he put forward one of the earliest arguments for universal human rights, an argument grounded in the Catholic vision of humanity, which we introduced at the beginning. Las Casas lived side by side with those who had been otherwise forgotten by the world. He recognised their humanity and their dignity. Dominicans continue to uphold this tradition today, and they do so in places closer to home on the British Isles. Sister Liz Smith grew up in Belfast in the 1970s at the heart of the Troubles. She lived on the Falls Road, a predominantly Catholic part of Belfast which experienced some of the worst violence. Gunfire, the risk of explosions, and the presence of soldiers were everyday experiences. And this is what she says about the Dominican sisters who worked with her and other young people in the Falls Road at that time.
They were the people who didn't give up on you. They were the people who believed in you. They were the people who called you forth. They were the people that told you just because you happened to be born into a family of 12 in the middle of the Falls Road didn't mean that that's where your life had to end. They were the people who said there is somewhere outside here. There are different experiences. And they didn't give up when the stones got thrown. They didn't get up when the bomb went off at the local pub. They didn't walk away. Now some might have. We wouldn't have known, we would have just thought they were assigned out. But I suppose that now I say 30 years later and 30 years as Dominican, that what it has done for me is it has made me realise I can't give up on the young people that I work with. And that is because my experience was that people who influenced me as a young person didn't get up. They didn't come in and look at us like other people did. Somebody recently said to me, I'm going to Belfast for the weekend and we're doing the Black Taxi Tour. A staff member in the school I work now, and I went, oh yeah, and she said, you don't approve, and I said, no, I felt like a monkey in the zoo. And that is how we felt as young people growing up, that these buses come in, these buses go out, these people come in, these news reporters come in, they take photographs, and if you could get your photograph on top of the Saracen with the rubber bullet and you got on the TV, wasn't it wonderful? But that wasn't wonderful, because they all drove away. The sisters didn't.
At the heart of the Dominican sisters' action was the belief that everyone deserves a level playing field in terms of dignity and opportunity, irrespective of their social circumstance. Simply by being there and staying in the midst of the troubles when they could have left, the sisters were showing their solidarity with young people who were otherwise cast aside and treated without the dignity of which they were deserving. Sister Liz, who was supported by the sisters growing up, continues to pass on the importance of dignity and opportunity for every single person. She is now a Dominican sister herself and works as a teacher and as a director of the Ballyfermot Advanced Project, supporting people with drug and alcohol abuse problems. In very different places and contexts, we have seen how Dominicans have responded to injustices and acted in inspiring ways, informed by their sense of each person's humanity and inherent dignity. So, what can you do in your own community to live out this message? Father Timothy Radcliffe simply says, "Look into the eyes of another person. You'll know what to do." Looking into the eyes of others, recognizing their humanity, is what the people we have heard about in this video have done. Whilst it might seem like these actions occurred in extreme circumstances, there are always opportunities to act in our own lives and contexts, as Father Mike Deeb explains.
First with Bartholomew de las Casas and all of them, where they saw how people have been treated like as they were subhuman. And we see people being treated as subhuman wherever we are, even in the most developed country in the world. So we have examples of that where Dominicans have played a key role. So hopefully we can start encouraging people to open their eyes, to see these things and to start responding to them.
That is what we can do today and going forward in our lives. Look into the eyes of the people you encounter. Recognize that that person, and every single person on our planet, comes from the same source of life as you. Every single person is deserving of dignity, respect, and love, just as you are.